Hello, everyone. I think we're set. We're ready to get back to the next session in the conference. This is going to be exploring the impact of overturning Roe v. Wade on bodily autonomy. My name is William Langston. I'm a psychology professor here at MTSU and one of the conference organizers, and I will be serving as the moderator. I'm going to let the members of the panel introduce themselves next before we get started, and I will call on you in order just to make it less ambiguous with the folks who are live and on Zoom. So we'll just start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Theodore Baker. I usually go by Theo, but this felt like a good time to bust out the full name. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a youth organizer with Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi. My job is to uplift the rising American electorate and make sure that everyone is brought into the decisions being made for Tennesseans. I work closely with two local organizations, RUCO Action and Generation Action, that's actually tabling out in the lobby today.
Great.
And Francie?
Hi, everybody. I am Francie Hunt. I use she, her pronouns. On behalf of Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi, I'm the advocacy and organizing director. And I also am the executive director of our 501c4 organization called Tennessee Advocates for Planned Parenthood. And that is our advocacy and political arm for Planned Parenthood here in Tennessee. And so my role is to help support excellent organizers like Theo, who is our youth organizer here at MTSU with our Generation Action chapter, and supporting our Action Council in the Murfreesboro, Rutherford County area called RUCO. And, most of our work is about helping build power across the state. And a lot of that is just a lot of on the ground relationship building. This year is an election year, so there's a lot at stake at every single level. And so the bulk of our work this year is to be activating our base and helping reach out to voters that are dismayed around the fall of Roe v. Wade. So I'm excited to be talking about that tonight as well. Thank you for having me be here. It's a beautiful space.
Thank you. And Patrick?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick Grzanka. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a professor of psychology and dean of social sciences at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I am so appreciative of the invitation to speak with you all today. I wish I were there in person, but I'm, a time zone away in East Tennessee. Since 2015, I've been on the board of our healthcare affiliate. After Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi, or PPGMR and PPT-MET merged and became PPTNM, I joined the board of TAP, Tennessee Advocates for Planned Parenthood, for which I'm now the board chair, and I also serve on the PPTNM board. I did not train in graduate school at the University of Maryland in reproductive justice or in the study of abortion, but I am an applied social issues researcher. And so when I came to Tennessee and I saw reproductive rights under attack, I got sort of pulled into the movement by local activists who saw a place for my skills, and I saw in turn a place and a way to channel my commitment to gender, sexual, and racial justice, to support the rights of all people in our state and region to exercise bodily autonomy, and to do so with an intersectional and reproductive justice lens. I continue that work today, and I'm deeply passionate about this, especially thinking about the relationship between social movements. So the fight for LGBT rights and the fight for reproductive justice are intertwined and inextricable from one another. And there can be no thing such as choice and bodily autonomy if we do not have an expansive vision for sexual, racial, gender liberation. So thanks for having me. And I look forward to our discussion.
And then it'll be Antoine.
Hello, my name is Antoine Dandridge. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the Black Organizer Program Manager for Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi. I've been on this journey now close to 10 years. Started out in 2014 during the No on One campaign, which was the first attempt to end abortion rights in Tennessee, and have continued all the way through the overturning of Roe v. Wade till now. And I'm here because I recognize those intersections of the work that we do in reproductive rights that aligns with the Black community through the lens of the reproductive justice movement work that was missing within our affiliate from a space of authenticity and space. And after years of organizing with our general populations, I began to realize that Black communities, which we spoke about deeply in our work, but maybe not have recognized how to intersect with those communities, have been something that's been extremely passionate to me. I'm extremely excited about our new work with HBCU organizing. We have our first Generation Action chapter at Tennessee State University, which is not too far from where you guys are located. It's the first HBCU chapter in the state to become part of the Gen Action movement. And I'm looking forward to continuing to build with our action councils that connect our Black communities to voters and Black folks who support the reproductive rights movement in Tennessee. And there's so many people that is waiting to be a part of, what the Black Organizing Program is bringing to our affiliates. So I'm very excited to be here to share with you my experiences and just my outlook on where we're going with our movement, and to be a part of this awesome conference today, especially as a Black LGBTQ man living in Tennessee who had my own triumphs. This movement has allowed me space to really find myself and develop my own voice with more authenticity and a ton of support, which is why I love the work that we all do together so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I've set the questions up. The overall theme is bodily autonomy for LGBTQ plus people. And I've set the questions up in 3 sections. And I think the prefatory remark is before the 2016 election, a lot of people said Roe v. Wade could be on the table. Vote like it matters. And people said, calm down, it won't happen. And then it did. And so what I would like you to do as we go through each set is maybe tell us your calm version of what you think the future may hold, followed by your most uncalm version of what the future may hold, just so people know what the stakes are. Okay, so the first category is reproductive health implications. And I know a lot of times when people LGBTQ plus, they think, what reproductive health implications? But Francie, if you'd like to start with your thoughts on that topic in particular.
Sure. And I appreciate the prep work that you all put into this conference to be so thorough. I think as the fall of Roe and its implications on the LGBTQ plus community, it's important to understand that it really impacts the LGBTQ plus community very particularly. We know that 22.8% of lesbians and 27.2% of bisexual women who have been pregnant are more likely than heterosexual women to have had an abortion. So when we talk about reproductive freedom and abortion rights in particular, it's something that does impact the LGBTQ plus community in a prominent manner. That's true also with the transgender individuals within the movement as well. A predominant number of folks from that segment also seek abortions. And we've seen, I was in Washington, D.C., was it last week? My time gets blurred, when SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, was taking up the mifepristone case, the Federal Drug Administration, FDA, versus mifepristone. And in that oral arguments, we heard that the Comstock law, which is a law that is about whether contraception can be mailed or distributed, that was up for grabs. That was something that was raised during those oral arguments. So I think, to the extent that not only abortion is going to be impacted, but also contraception in and of itself, that's something that certainly impacts so many of us. So I see that there will be incredible rollback. So I think the panic version that I would say is, I think that, here in Tennessee in particular, We're seeing attacks that are certainly from the right wing generally, but there's a unique feature I sense here in Tennessee that's more theocratically driven, more religiously driven. And I think the dramatic element that I feel when I'm at the legislature is not just like a dehumanization that you often feel when you're in an oppressed group or a group that's disenfranchised. There's a layer of hatefulness, not just a dehumanization, but they actually see you as a demon. Because when you have a certain religious view, they don't really see you and your humanity. They actually, and it's not even like you're neutral, but you're actually seen as an opposition, or even worse than that, an enemy. And in Planned Parenthood, we often talk about like, we don't have opposition at the state legislature. We have actual enemies, people who really wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, spending all of their time figuring out how to close our doors, how to hurt our people. And that's what I would say is probably my most panicked, hair on fire level of fear, is that the rollbacks that we're seeing, like the fact that right now our Senate could pass legislation that would make it more difficult for an LGBTQ plus family to adopt or foster young people that they may not agree with their lifestyle or whatever. And so that's alarming to me to see. And so, by the way, I hope you write Governor Lee to have him veto that piece of legislation. But my calm version, I think, is that we know, like, I think that I would be worried if we thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I don't even know what the answer is. This is so awful. I have no idea what it's going to take to turn the tide. No, we actually do know what it takes to make the change. We actually do know that it requires, us to break this anti-LGBTQ plus supermajority, the anti-choice supermajority. We know the math. It takes 10 seats. We have to flip 10 seats in order to break that supermajority, and in these seats, we know that most of those seats fall within 4 counties. We're looking at Knox and Rutherford County. You're in a hot spot. And Montgomery County and Shelby, right? So we kind of know where we need to work. And we know that a lot of these races, we're looking at anywhere from like 200 to 1,000 vote margins. I mean, that's like 2 phone banks, like an hour-long phone bank, and you could win. So we know what it takes. The question is, even though it's easy to say we need to hold their feet to the fire, we need to hold those legislators and Governor Lee's feet to fire, which we definitely need to do. But the work right now is we need to hold each other's feet to the fire. And are we showing up to do the work it takes to win? And that's my calm version.
Okay, I'd like to invite Antoine in next.
Woo, I feel like Francie said a lot, and I agree with so much of it. I would say my panic version is realizing how within the Black community, how we already have so many internal issues and like struggles as queer people, to even speak out on these things. So these laws and everything that we've seen over the last, 10 years or so has made it more difficult for people to want to come out and address these elephants in the room and advocate for themselves as Black queer people. My calm version would be that I have to trust and believe that people are only going to allow themselves to struggle and live in fear for so long after watching everything that's happened, because the reproductive rights movement has been basically the framework that we are seeing used in the anti-LGBTQ movement. It's the framework that we are seeing in anti-Black movements, and these politicians across the South is able to take the same blueprint of that's happened to us, overturn the repro rights, and obviously showing all of America that this is how we can disband humanity across the South. And I think that it's a really difficult space to talk when you include Black and brown people, because again, as Francie mentioned, there is the religious aspect of it, and trying to convince someone that they can love God and be seen as whole and as a fully recognizable human being for themselves, and to represent that in the community is a whole nother level that we have to continue to peel back. And my fear is that I don't want people to feel like they're not good enough to be who they are and to be able to stand against these oppositions, because at the end of the day, as we represent in the world of RJ, reproductive justice is humanitarian work. LGBTQ trans rights is humanitarian work. And we all have the right to the pursuit of happiness and freedom. And we do that by doing exactly what Francie mentioned, that we have to get out and we have to convince our neighbors and our community, because what you don't want to happen is to do things that a lot of us organizers did in the aftermath of the Roe v. Wade, and have to go back and look at those same people who did not answer those calls or show up to those polls or did not choose to go out and vote. They come back to us and they ask, what can I do now? And I just want people to know it's more difficult to do once the law has passed. So, you know, I think that would be my take on that.
Okay. We'll go to Patrick next.
So in 2016, when then Governor Haslam signed into law a bill that enabled counselors and psychotherapists in private practice to discriminate against their clients on the basis of the client's sincerely held principles, this law was widely viewed as an attack on LGBT people in the state. And a team of psychologists and graduate students at UT, led by me and in partnership with the Tennessee Equality Project, we embarked on a statewide investigation of the effects of the bill on people in the community. And in addition to conducting a survey that revealed some really disturbing things about how the law would discourage people from seeking mental health care, we conducted interviews with a subsample of participants. And one of the things that's really stood out to me in our findings is that when we asked LGBT identified people, and we had a really diverse sample of Black and Latinx LGBT people, older LGBT people, young LGBT people, when we asked them about the law and how they thought it could be used to engender harm, many of them invoked abortion. They said that this is a kind of bill that could be used to discriminate against people who might want to talk with their therapist about an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy. And I thought this was so striking that especially LGBT people who've experienced multiple forms of marginalization, stigma, or discrimination in their lives, to them, they viewed this law, which was framed in the media as primarily one about sexuality or about gender identity. They saw it as an intersectional tool for a wide variety of forms of discrimination that would harm the most vulnerable people in society and would corrupt and pervert this really sacred relationship that between a client and their therapist. And years later, after the fall of Roe, with the Dobbs decision, we conducted focus groups with emerging adults here in East Tennessee to get their perspectives on the consequences of Dobbs on their lives, their attitudes, their sexual and reproductive health care behavior, et cetera, their intentions to stay in Tennessee. And a lot of LGBT people signed up for our focus groups. And what they made so clear are all the ways that for young queer and trans people, Dobbs is affecting them, even if they're not engaged in procreative, heterosexual, or heteronormative sex. And I think that whilst for many people, again, sort of people who are not part of the community or people who are only getting their knowledge from mainstream media coverage of Dobbs and of the fight for reproductive rights in the United States today, it might be really unclear to folks as to why abortion is an LGBT issue. But what we know about the community is that LGBT people struggle systematically and disproportionately to receive affirming healthcare around their bodies. And we know that LGBT people are disproportionately likely to be victims of sexual violence and assault. And these statistics are even more sobering when we look at LGBT people of color, in particular Black and Latinx LGBT people, as well as LGBT people experiencing houselessness, which is more common among LGBT people than it is among the rest of the population. And so whenever I talk to students or people in the community about why abortion rights affect all of us, one of the things that I really try to underscore is that access to safe and legal abortion is one part of a multidimensional spoke of bodily autonomy and freedom that implicates all of our rights. And another thing that I thought was really interesting that we learned from our young people is how closely tied or how closely connected they viewed abortion access and contraception access. And I think this is really an important point that the writing is on the wall. It is obvious that religious extremists seek to strip away the right to contraception in the United States. And abortion was not really step one. It was taking away abortion rights as part of a multi-pronged game plan to restrict all pregnancy people's control of their bodies. And that implicates all of us, regardless of our sexual desires or our intended sexual behaviors. So my panic is that coalitions on the left will fracture because of a variety of major global and domestic issues, and that we will fail in upcoming electoral fights to stem the tide of violence that comes from what I call the coalitions of violence, the white supremacist, Christian supremacist, and patriarchal coalitions that seek to harm us. And so what keeps me up at night or wakes me up at night is often that the left will fail to cohere into a coalition to stem the tide of this violence. But my hope, which comes almost exclusively from the young people who I have the privilege of spending so much time with as an educator, is that we are on the precipice of new movements and new frontiers of justice that have vocabularies of reproductive justice that haven't even yet been invented. And they will help us see and conceive of a future that has more freedom than we can imagine.
Thank you. And finally, Theodore.
So my calm version of how I feel the future is going to go is I see a legislature emboldened by our judiciary. Our previous president's legacy is inviting more judges that are judging one way, judging as an originalist interpretation of the Constitution, and they're more likely to restrict bodily autonomy. And when our legislature sees how our justices are ruling, and they're more likely to create laws that are a little bit further step this way. They aren't being challenged. So we can move further this way, keep shifting the window. So I think our legislature is more likely to create laws that are restricting different types of bodily autonomy, whether that is reproductive justice or LGBTQ individuals' bodily autonomy, and shifting into different zones of privacy, whether that is the home or the school, as we've seen throughout today. But as Francie has sort of mentioned, that can be shifted by the people advocating locally. Tennessee has historically been a hotbed for social change. We can see into the future in Tennessee today and from the civil rights movement. The laws and the bills that are being debated in our legislature are going to be debated in other state legislatures in the next few years. And our advocacy that are being seen, the advocacy that is being seen in the halls of our capital today is going to be seen in the halls of the next capitals in the next few years as well. So while we might be afraid, or while we might be scared that our bodily autonomy is being restricted, we can combat that by being loud, by advocating for our bodily autonomy in our communities. My fear version of the future, and I think we'll get a bit more into this later, is the concurrence for the Dobbs decision, where Justice Clarence Thomas mentioned that he would like to revisit the line of privacy cases, including specifically Griswold versus Connecticut. Griswold versus Connecticut basically established the constitutional right to privacy, and it slated out, it is where LGBTQ individuals and, it is where LGBTQ rights and reproductive rights as we know them today originate from that right to privacy. Because the Constitution says that we are not able to legislate within the doctor's room, within your bedroom. So while I'm a bit unsure of what cases will be that could go and against Griswold, if Griswold is overturned, that is my fear version of the future.
Thank you all. I think it's interesting to note as we go through that, how difficult it is to separate any of these issues because they are in fact intertwined and dependent upon one another. And I'll also remark that my least calm thoughts are so much more uncalm than yours. And maybe at the end we can discuss the most extreme version of the things I can imagine for the future. But I do want to stick to the script. When we think about the implications of overturning Roe for transgender people in particular, we know for trans youth, a lot of gender affirming care bans are already in place and more proposed. Speak to that, and then also the implications for adults seeking gender affirming care. And let's give Theodore the first crack at this one.
Right. I think I didn't really realize how intertwined the issues were until I was preparing for the conference. But the reproductive justice issues and the transgender healthcare issues, they occupy the same space because it all boils down to bodily autonomy and being able to access the healthcare that you as an individual need. There are two bills that are on Planned Parenthood's watch list. Let me put up the numbers. House Bill 1895, which is an abortion travel and support ban for minors, and House Bill 2310, a trans care travel and support ban for minors. And these bills are exact mirrors of each other. Just saying that you cannot help a minor access the care they need outside of the state. And this is going on in other states as well, where, as Antoine mentioned earlier, individuals and representatives are using the anti-abortion playbook to become an anti-gender affirming care and anti-transgender playbook. That was specifically seen in Alabama. So I think it's very interesting how these playbooks are used to target different groups.
Thank you. Francie, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess the greatest kind of non-com, just kind of articulated very succinctly is we are seeing an onslaught of a growing fascist movement. That is a reality. And, and along with the, whole idea of reality, even that itself is disintegrating, like a common understanding of what reality actually is with the onset of AI and things like that. Anyway, I wanted to just address that there are a lot scarier things, and I just want to say that. But I couldn't say it more eloquently than Theo already did, that the movement for abortion rights and reproductive rights is rooted in bodily autonomy, which is the same root that we're finding the attacks on gender affirming care. And they're, and we're seeing it, it's really from a right-wing playbook in terms of how they're rolling out these attacks in a coordinated manner in states all across the country. And so, that we're very concerned about what that means in terms of our ability to provide services, our ability to keep our doors open, and what's going to happen to individuals should our doors close. And for folks that don't realize this, like to be even more meta, like we could talk about the services for women and patients and individuals that need gender affirming care, but that the issues are even broader in the sense that it's about a consolidation of powers that will not only impact us, but a much broader group of folks across this country, and particularly here in Tennessee. Tennessee is a laboratory for these right-wing ideologues, and they try it out here first, and then they roll it out across the country. So we're really on the front lines of seeing those battles here in Tennessee. And so we have an alliance. We need to have an alliance in our understanding of how these issues intersect.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to Patrick.
I think these are all really amazing points. One of the things that I'd like to just, I guess, further underscore about the interconnectedness of all of these movements to restrict bodily autonomy is anti-CRT, critical race theory attacks and anti-DEI attacks that have been quite successfully rolling across the country. If we look, for example, at Florida's criticisms of the AP African American History curriculum, one of the things that I think is really missing, again, from mainstream political coverage of this development is that the terms and the people who were most commonly scrubbed from the curriculum are things like intersectionality, its founder, Kimberly Crenshaw, and phrases like Black queer studies, and people who developed these intersectional ways of thinking about the relationships among systems of oppression. And it is no mistake that these various movements are kind of working together. That is, again, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, et cetera, to restrict young people's access to information that helps them see how systems work. And all of these systems are designed to deny people information, to minimize people's sociological understandings of how invisible social forces work to restrict our life choices and chances. And I think pretending like they're isolated issues that all sit in kind of parallel lanes is one of the ways that coalitions of violence seek to harm us. Because if they have different groups of political actors, different groups and social movements fracturing, picking one aspect of their identities to fight for and not attending to the multiple ways in which these systems, again, coalesce to produce harm, then they keep us separate, not working together, and we're more easily defeatable. So I think it's important to look at this sort of from, I don't know, I suppose like both directions, not both perspectives, both directions. It's like the harms are interconnected and the resistance has to be interconnected. And failure to treat these issues as intersectional, I think, is exactly what they want us to do. Because they're thinking in intersectional terms. They just don't call it that, right? Actually, that's sort of the irony. They understand how LGBT rights and racial justice and bodily autonomy for pregnancy-capable people are intertwined. They understand that in crystal clear ways. They would just like us not to see them as interconnected.
Thank you. Thank you. And now Antoine.
My apologies, sound was
You're-
off. I feel like everybody is hitting the nail on the head here. When I think about the attack on gender affirming care, it really did another situation amongst Black supporters of reproductive rights and just Black people in communities in general. I thought it was really interesting how this particular attack precedes the overturn of Roe v. Wade, because what happens is I felt that Roe v. Wade surprisingly brought a lot of people together in the aftermath. And so the next best thing you could attack was gender affirming care. And I'm thinking of how this will be the right-wing appeal to an opportunity to appeal to Black men who really was not, who was more conservative thinkers, but may have voted on the cusp of Democrats. They were able to, we're seeing a huge transition of Black men who starting to vote more conservative, even with all of the said racial implications that we have witnessed as communities of people of color from the right-wing party. And they're still been able to garner this group. I think Francie used the word consolidation of power. There has been a consolidation of extremely religious, people of color and people who may have had biases of the LGBTQ community anyway. And so when you talk about the gender affirming care, they focus on this concept of it being children because it plays into this narrative of brainwashing people. And this soothes people's ability to say, that's why I didn't want to support the Democratic Party, without really talking about the processes. There was no education of processes of gender affirming care, and there was no education about the harm that our young folks were dealing with without access to it. And that they made it sound like it was something way more intrusive than what it really was, because they knew people would not research it because of the bias. And that's when this get really strategic, because people would literally vote based on that the fact that this party has been able to figure out how to infiltrate communities based on things that they know people will vote for or against is really scary. And that's why it's so important for LGBTQ folks to educate on processes and procedures, because you do not want to leave opportunity for people to kind of, in a sense, brainwash people, because that's what's happening. And so, yeah, I'm really glad to hear that we're all kind of on the same page, because I think they give us inroads as to the next steps of education and just power moves that we would have to make to, really kind of combat that. But I thought that was a really interesting take. And just looking at the number of Black men who are now starting to vote or show more interest in the Republican Party is working. And it's mainly because of the way that the Republican Party and the GOP was able to really tap into the insecurities of people of color around youth gender affirming care bills that they put in the books this year.
That was such
Sorry,
a-
I do research on the psychology of belief, and my alarms are going off because some things have been said that are unbelievably cool here, and I want to get this panel back together in my lab and discuss ways to design some research about, especially what Antoine was just saying about finding the levers to change people's minds. That was brilliant. I'm gobsmacked by that. Thank you all very much. We have a little time left, and we want to leave some time for the audience. So I would like to drive this bus off the cliff if the panelists would like to ride off the cliff with me, and we'll just see where it goes. I will tell you what my concern is that during the pandemic, a lot of folks touched evil and found that they like it. And the way they did that is they decided that some people's lives were worth less. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of Facebook posts where people said, well, it's only old people dying. Why should we care about that? And some of those same groups of people are also the fans of us ceding ownership of our bodies to the government and saying the government can decide whether you live or die, what you can do with your body, that you do not own it and you do not control it. And those people don't think some people's lives matter. And I'm very concerned about a future, because if you watch Schindler's List, there's this moment of transition where some guys just walk up and there's a person on the street and they start harassing him and they just kill him and they keep walking. And the society had transitioned to this idea that, well, that's okay. I mean, if you're in the right uniform. I don't know that we're headed that way, but I really think the bulwark that says the government does not own your body, whether you're pro or con abortion, is that wall has been breached, and it makes me very concerned. given the things that I see on Facebook, including what was said about this conference, but that's for the next session. So does anybody want to go first? Zoom, you can raise your hand or
I can always talk.
okay, Francie
about
goes.
this. I mean, when you were talking, it made me think like, why is bodily autonomy important? Like, it's more than just like, it's a nice to have, right? It's more than a nice to have. Like, our view is that unless you have your own sovereignty over your body, you absolutely cannot be free. You can't be free. I mean, it's the centerpiece. And, last year or the year before, when after Roe fell, I was so upset about this that I walked across the state from Memphis all the way to Johnson City in protest and in pilgrimage for bodily autonomy, because it's not even a political issue. It's not even like a right wing or a left wing issue. It is a fundamental value, core value of existence. And the thing is, what we know is unless you protect these concepts, these ideas around bodily autonomy, it could completely disappear as something that we protect and hold dear. And so for us, it's more than just like, we want to keep our doors open. We do want to keep our doors open, but the fight is much greater than that. It's more than just like, we want to break the supermajority so that we have more votes. It's much greater than that. And so I think that's an important, context that this conversation has to be in. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I'm looking at the Zoom folks, but you probably don't know that. Either one of you want to hop in?
I just, one thing I wanted to, that Antoine's comments reminded me of that I wanted, I mean, we are at a university conference, so I want to give a plug for some really amazing new scholarship from the transgender studies scholar, Jules Gill-Peterson. She just published a piece in GLQ, which is the kind of top journal of queer studies, on the use of children in both the fight against transgender rights and gender affirming care and the abortion rights movement, and the real synergies and consistencies around invoking children, babies, in creating a moral panic around gender affirming healthcare and sexual and reproductive healthcare for pregnancy capable people, specifically abortion. And I think her insights are very valuable. She's also got a great Substack called Sad Brown Girl that if you might consider subscribing to. But all of that is to say that I think we also can't do the thing as we move forward that I think the abortion rights movement in particular fell victim to for decades, which is like ceding ground when it comes to other movements in order to protect like our interests. So like we can't compromise around transgender healthcare just to protect some access to abortion rights. I think those are the kinds of compromises that fascists want us to make. So give up the rights of one imagined separate community over there so that we over here can maintain some amount of what we want. And when we do that, again, we fracture communities, we tear individuals apart, we make them choose one part of themselves over another. And, I just can't, for me, bodily autonomy means not only the right to exercise reproductive choice and all reproductive healthcare decisions, but and also the right to manage a person's body, like to manage one's body without regard to state intervention. And that includes modifications to one's body that are related to the affirmation of one's gender identity, like period. Those things have to be viewed as intertwined. I also think, as Antoine reminded us very early on, that like our foremothers in the reproductive justice movement taught us that the ability to have children in safe communities free from environmental toxins, environmental racism, and over policing from a white supremacist police state are also part of bodily autonomy. too. So we can't give up those things just to protect abortion. They all have to come together.
I
Yes,
think
I
at this
can go.
point, we can open it up to some questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, we have a microphone coming around the room.
I do know there are a couple of Zoom questions. I don't know who has access to those.
The master Zoom computer is on the back wall. Just please be careful you don't shut it off. I think you can click the chat button.
Never mind, these all look like technology questions.
Oh. Nobody has a question? Okay. Oh, good.
Wanted to follow up on a comment you had made, Theodore, when you were talking about like your worst case scenario, is the attack on due process as a kind of central doctrine of constitutional rulings. And I know that Clarence Thomas is just a big fan of due process. So would any of y'all like to elaborate on the threat to Obergefell, et cetera, on those grounds?
I can elaborate. Yeah, as I think that area of law is my special interest. So I think specifically Lawrence and Obergefell are based off of Griswold and the right to privacy established in the 14th Amendment, the due process interpretation. So Griswold did the thing. And when Clarence Thomas, in his concurrence, decided that he would like to revisit those cases, if Griswold or Lawrence or Obergefell were overturned, it would end up effectively retroactively overturning the cases based on that decision afterwards. I am not sure how credible his concurrence is, because it is effectively only one justice stating that he would like to revisit. But his form of interpretation in terms of originalism and textualism that we see in the Dobbs decision is prevalent within the court. In terms of like neither abortion or privacy, gay, black, none of those words are mentioned in the Constitution. So that is my concern whenever we are visiting cases on queer rights in the future. And similarly to Dobbs, Dobbs was overturned to allow abortion rights back to the states. If Obergefell were revisited and overturned, that's what would happen. Thank you.
We can fit one more question or we can end spot on time. It's up to the audience. Yes, we have one more question.
How would you effectively reach people who have already been misled and don't really understand that the reproductive rights issue intertwines with gender affirming care? How do you reach those people and then maybe like persuade them to believe that they have been misled and that it's not about protecting children?
I would love to talk about that, and I think Patrick could as well. Probably everybody here could.
Yeah.
Because we're working with Dr. Grzanka on a project called the Deep Values Conversations. And I have two ways to answer that question. One is from like how to deal with people in a cult. because that's kind of a side thing I like to learn about. And one of the things that they say for folks that have been in cults that believe things that are completely not a part of the norm, is to give space for them and always keep the door open, so that when it's time for them to see reality, that they have a place to go to. I think there's a lesson for that. And I mentioned cults purposefully because I think in the 2016 election, we saw how prevalent that QAnon was. And there's a really great BBC documentary around how this journalist from the BBC went to Arizona and, was covering the election, and he saw some guy that was wearing like fur and was, didn't have a shirt on and had like a Viking hat on. And he was like, we know as journalists not to go to the most, crazy looking person to give an interview when you're, a foreign correspondent. Even though this person was saying that the reason why they needed to make sure that Trump was in office was because he needed to make sure that he was going to get rid of the cabal of, pedophiles. And lo and behold, January 6th, we saw that same guy, the Q shaman, in the Capitol. And that's when they started doing this documentary on QAnon as a cult phenomenon and how it interfaces with politics. So I think from that perspective, I think the way I'd answer your question is like keeping the door open so that when people are actually ready to hear the truth, that they know who to go to. A little more in depth, I think, is in our experience doing deep values conversations where we have long conversations where we share our own experiences. This is where, giving research and data is not as impactful as it is to have a conversation from your own personal experience to talk about why these issues matter to you. That we have found can be very impactful. And we're actually doing a study right now looking at like, what are the persuasive qualities of that kind of conversation? And what we find is it's less around like the persuasion and getting people to like wake up and come to our view. In that universe, it's really about helping, because there's so much stigma around abortion, there's stigma around gender affirming care, that and trans individuals and LGBTQ actually, right? When you actually start talking to folks and allowing space for their own honest opinions, what we find is that they on their own come closer to where we are versus like digging in deeper into like what the talking points are for their own like side or whatever their news source is. The other piece is, I think, we only know what we know based on people that we trust or information sources that we trust. I mean, and part of our work as organizers is to become that trusted source, for Planned Parenthood to have a strong brand so that people know that when they come to us, we're telling the truth based on what we know in our experience. And I think that's where I would say, individuals developing that own, sense of confidence around their own experiences. And we do offer like how to talk about abortion. And we lead sessions called The Queer New World so that people can learn how to understand and talk about the issues in an honest and authentic way. And we do that for, everyday people, and we do them for candidates as well.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to end on that note. If some of the Zoom folks would like to have one final word, you can maybe have like a minute apiece.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think that's a wonderful question, by the way. For me, I was bringing a new program to Planned Parenthood that didn't exist. So a lot of like relational organizing strategies were key for me. Working with people who did everyday things, local barbershops, hair salons, friends, family. And honestly, it was the really tough job in moments to validate people's lack of understanding, because of their own experience is more important to them than it is to you. So sometimes understanding where people are, open the door for people to understand where you are and how you may have arrived to where you are. So what that sound like for me a lot of times, or what the experience was like for me, was really helping folks understand why they may not have supported abortion. There was a lot of stigma, shame, a lot of political tactics that we have experienced that have changed people's ways. And there's also a racial history with the access to abortion movement or access to reproductive care movement that needed to be addressed. So basically not trying to run away from the elephant in the room, but giving yourself permission to fail and succeed while biting the elephant eating that elephant one bite at a time. I think it brings a sense of realism to you as an organizer that people can trust.
All right, thank y'all very much. Sorry, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Should have had these ready. I'm sorry, Zoom folks, you don't get the conference gift, but you may have the conference gift speech. On behalf of the conference planners, supporters, MTSU Lambda Association, the College of Behavioral and Health Sciences, and the Conference Advisory Board, thank you for your support of our efforts to present this worthwhile event. We want to especially thank you for your commitment to standing strong, and we ask that you accept this small token of our appreciation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.